Hi, this is Chuck at Lazarus Recovery Podcast at the junction of faith and recovery. This episode of the podcast is about attitude, basically. It turns out that I'm working on a lesson for CR. It's called Victory. I'm looking at what is recovery all about. It goes to a question somebody asked me. They have their struggles, but they said, what does recovery look like for me? And it's all about expectations. It's all about trying to define what recovery, and there's millions of different types of it, what it looks like, what you can expect from it. A lot of people expect the removal of issues. In other words, people bring into various psychological, emotional, addictive issues into recovery. In AA, they come to get some victory over their alcoholism. But the issue is, what do they expect? If they can stop drinking, what do they expect? Many people come into CR expecting like release from their issues. In other words, if they come in for anxiety, they want if you work the program, you're going to be anxiety free. Faith people, they come into a faith recovery thing, and they have their stuff that they bring in. Some of it very similar to AA. They have addiction issues or something like that. Or they have anxiety issues, or they have psychological issues, or they have relational issues or something like that. And they expect if they do work the program that they're going to have some sort of victory over those particular problems. And I think what I'd like to talk about is, what does victory look like? I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience. What is that? What is this victory thing? What does it look like? And I think that's an important thing, because people put time in recovery, in faith or in, OA or anything, Al-Anon or whatever, and they have their own definition of what that's going to do. Goes to the question that the guy I know said, well, what does recovery look like for me? Considering my stuff, what does recovery look like for me? And I think I want to talk about that this time. I'm not going to bless a certain way that gives you complete release from your issues. I just want to talk about the whole attitude of what do we expect in recovery? What do we expect about that? And what does recovery look like in the face of stuff? I think that's the thing that I'm a little bit concerned about, is that we have sort of a weird attitude about recovery. And AA says it's recovery is if it's working, is a life second to none. Let's talk a little. I want to talk about myself. Conclusions. It's sort of a personal thing to me. And it's a little bit about, my attitude towards my recovery. And then that's sort of what I want to do. I got sober a long time ago. I was 28 when I came into AA for the final time. I'd been in and out of AA in the Navy, but, I just got out of the Navy. I came home and I started going to AA because I knew I had to stop drinking. And I was 28. And I haven't had a drink since. I'm like 47 years old or something like that. It's been a journey, but, they say share your experience, strength, and hope, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what it's like to get sober, but I want to tell you what it's like to live and recover clean. And I'm discovering things even now. As I look back, as I thought about this lesson of victory, I chewed on it, and it was like a dog on a bone. It was just it set my teeth off. I was just like, what? And I've still. It wasn't until I started working this podcast out, logging it into the media stuff, and I sort of realized that I was coming at it wrong, because I started telling the story, and I'll tell it now. Like I said, I got sober, 47 years ago. And I went to AA, and I went to AA because I didn't want to hurt anymore. I didn't want to die. Because I was pretty convinced by that time that if I continued to drink, inevitably it was going to do me in. And I just was convinced, like step one, admitted, blah, 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 blah. I was convinced that I was going to die by a death. And I'd seen it in other people. So I was pretty much determined that I was not doing well. And I had to get sober. First thing, priority one, get sober. And I went to AA, and I actually did what they suggested. I joined a group and sort of got a sponsor and became active in a young people's group in Boston. And I later moved to Boston after about, a few months, 6 or 8 months, I moved into Boston. I got a job in Boston. I moved into Boston. And I think that's where, and I remember that. I remember the whole thing. What happened as I've thought about this is that looking back is a little rosy, but I look back and I said, gradually over the first couple years, I didn't realize it, but I started in some way or form or fashion looking forward to sobriety. I did things. Drinking, I didn't do anything. I just got sick and stuff. But in sobriety, I was nervous. I was anxious. I was crazy. I was uncomfortable physically. But I was doing things I had never, ever done before. And I was doing them sober. And I was doing them with people. I often say as I talk, those years were the best years of my life. They weren't, and this is a key point of what I want to talk about today. They were the best years of my life, but they weren't the most comfortable years of my life. And that's a key point that I'm going to run through this podcast. It doesn't mean that you're going to look back on it and say, oh God, that was awful. Because I was uncomfortable, but it was not awful. It really wasn't awful. And if I'm fair, I have to say that it was not awful. And that means that it doesn't mean that recovery necessarily feels good or is easy, but that doesn't mean it's not good. And I think that's the key point that has dawned on me while I was chewing through this. Just because recovery is not comfortable does not mean it's not good, and does not mean that your memory of it later is not going to be fond. Because if you can filter out the discomfort, a lot of really amazing, wonderful, awesome things happen in recovery. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to feel wonderful. It doesn't mean that I'm going to feel like I'm wonderfully wasted, like on drugs or alcohol. It means that wonderful things are going to happen and wonderful memories are going to be made. That doesn't mean it's all good. Doesn't mean it's all wonderful. Doesn't mean that stuff happened that didn't wreck you. It doesn't mean that, every bit of experience wasn't, crippling. But it does mean that in amongst all the difficulty, some really good things and memorable things happened. And if I discount those wonderful things because there was discomfort in it, I shortchange myself a lot. I shortchange myself. So that's sort of the way that it's an epiphany to me. It really is an epiphany to me. So basically, I guess what I'm saying is that because I'm uncomfortable about my stuff and with my stuff and in my stuff, does not mean that the recovery is bad, or that I won't later remember with fondness, or the fact that maybe I'm cheating myself because I'm letting the surface discomfort, blind me to the good stuff that's happening right around me. In other words, I'm cheating myself of enjoying the good stuff by focusing on the discomfort. So that's the basic thing. That's I'm almost done. That's what it is. But let's talk about that. Let's talk a little bit about, how we let the discomfort, interrupt our enjoyment or recognition of good stuff going around. It's the old AA thing, attitude of gratitude. It takes work to realize, and I'm terrible at it, realize that I can be uncomfortable in my stuff and still have very good stuff happening. I can be in a situation that the situation is terrible and still, in retrospect, acknowledge that good things were happening. In other words, there was good stuff in the middle of disastrous stuff. And that sometimes interrupts my commentary of the situation. Well, it was all bad because of A, B, C, and D, and therefore that whole situation was bad because of A, B, C, and D. That's not altogether true. As I look through my life, I had periods. This goes with the thing of, secular recovery and faith recovery, faith and secular recovery. I have excellent memories of my time in AA. Excellent. I mean, they're some of the best of my life. And I was extremely uncomfortable. But as I look back in retrospect, they were amazing. I was doing things I never did before. I was hiking, I was doing things. I was madly in love on occasions and destroyed because something went wrong. I was experiencing things I had never ever experienced before. And I was uncomfortable all at the same thing because of my anxiety, because of all the things, but I was living. And in retrospect, that's all you can ask for. But I let my stuff obscure the good that was happening. And that's to I have to take ownership of that. So what's your recovery look like? You got to sort of look at it in a different lens besides what's my stuff doing to me right now. We all have stuff, and it all makes it difficult and stuff like that. But we've got to look at it and say, gee, that was an excellent time. And that's what I'm going to visit a friend who got sober with me 47 years ago. I'll be seeing him in 3 days. 3 days, yeah. Well, maybe four, middle of next week. And, he was young. He was 21 and I was 28. We were wicked young. And we share the memories. And his wife was around, too. She was sort of a hangers-on around about that time. She knows the people we're talking about. She was friend to some of the people that we're talking about. And it was just, so we talk about it. Age has made it a little less difficult, but there are still things that hurt. But the fondness of the memories, some of the memories is awkward because some of the situations were extremely bad, and yet there's good memories. And I'm just, this is new to me, and the thing that clutters a lot of the, recovery and spiritual, church and spiritual and all that other stuff is that bad situations colored the experience. And if I'm honest, I have to say, I really enjoyed that in the middle of a catastrophe. you're sort of editing a little bit and trying to, and you realize that was really a good situation. I had really good feelings, and it's just simply overwhelmed by bad situations. And you can't blame the whole thing. You can't blame faith for the fact you got yourself in a jam. And you can't blame secular recovery because the church worked better for you at a particular time. You can't do that. Because some of my most wonderful times were my painful times, but they were in AA. Some of the most endearing relationships that I have are AA relationships, like the guy I'm going to see. I had to put a little work in it, but it is an enduring relationship. You don't have many of those. Have friends from AA that passed away, and they're, lifetime, eternal friends. It's a eternal thing, and that's an amazing thing. You got to give AA credit for that. And I have people who were absolute saints in the church who benefit greatly, who passed away. And, I have to say, that, someday, we'll see them again. And that's a wonderful thing. So it's, this whole thing is about trying to learn and to talk about separating the stuff from the good stuff that's going on. In other words, everything has a bit of stuff in it, and we've got to learn to try to filter out the stuff and look at the things that are going on. And that's what this podcast is about, and the funny thing is it applies to both faith and recovery. Our evaluation of something for me is clouded by the hurts and the thing that happens. In other words, something really wicked bad happens, and I don't blame the stuff, I blame the whole thing. In other words, if something really bad happened in church, I blame church instead of the stuff in the church that hurt me. There's a difference. You got to parse out where the real bad stuff. And the funny thing is, I've realized just doing this that it's everything has stuff. I look at it. I blame the church for the stuff. Or I blame the church for the people in the church who have stuff. And I miss the wonderful stuff. I forget the wonderful stuff as it buried in the junk that happens. In other words, the flavor of the bad stuff, corrupts the good things that happen. And that's not necessarily fair to anybody. Some people are just absolute wrecks, and they sour and pollute everything. But if you can sort of get a little distance and look, you can see the good stuff, and you can segregate the bad stuff. And that's sort of my epiphany right now, is to realize that, good recovery requires us the ability to separate and look accurately and separate the bad from the good. To look and try to separate and evaluate the situation and decouple the bad stuff that happened. Evaluate what was good as good, even though it got tainted and wrecked by bad stuff. That's sort of the way it is with relationships. You can't blame all of the relationship on really awful periods of time, and that's difficult for me. Because, if there's a person that it just was a wreck and just destroyed, it's very easy to just say that the whole thing was a wreck. There was nothing good there. And that's a very difficult thing for me to do, is to say, that in the midst of being on a ship and having somebody almost drive me to suicide, that all of the ship was bad. I mean, the Navy wasn't fun, but there were some amazing experiences. And if I can decouple the bad stuff and remember the good stuff, liberties in Hong Kong, the view from Victoria Peak in Hong Kong, even the amazing colors of Olongapo City in the Philippines. I know some people in faith would say, oh my God, it's a hellhole, and it was, but it was colorful too. Walking in Japan, all sorts of things that were just, playing golf in the Philippines, all sorts of amazing things, visiting places you've never been, amazing things, of relationships with reasonably decent shipmates, going on liberty with people, of having them, when I was sober, go on liberty with me without expecting me to drink, of watching out for me, of all the different things, of all the people I met, all the different people I met, all the different things I saw. That's all good stuff, intermixed with other stuff. That the very idea that I can somehow parse and analyze something and extract the bad and try to piece out and tease out the good. That's a whole new idea to me, because if there's anything goes wrong, it's all wrong. And I'm going to expunge everything that has to do with that. I'm going to protect myself from a bad, poisonous relationship by nuking the whole relationship, to protect myself. Oh, it was altogether terrible, but I don't have any good memories of it because it was all terrible. It worked out horribly wrong at the end. That's not altogether realistic. That's not altogether realistic. But it takes a discrimination. It takes a wisdom and discrimination to sort that out. Protect yourself from the bad. It's like a bad relationship. You got to protect yourself from the bad. You don't want to get sucked back into something bad. But I think that's what my epiphany about this thing is that your stuff doesn't have to poison your hope of an enjoyable life. And I think that's recovery. I don't think you get rid of your stuff necessarily altogether, but you learn to sort it out, to parse it out, and to live as much as possible in the good, and to accept that there's going to be some struggles there. You got your stuff and you're going to have to work with it. You need people in your life to help you work with it. That's the trick of this, is that you have to learn to enjoy the good and live with the problematic part of your stuff. Some of the stuff gets better, some doesn't. But the way you react to it, the way you control it, helps. It's exactly like I used to say about you got it. Recovery is all about being willing to hear the truth and come up with a plan to deal with the truth. This is a similar thing. You have to sometimes accept the fact that your stuff is, in one form or another, is going to be around. You're going to learn to deal with it a little bit, but you got to learn to live to a certain extent with it. You don't have to like it. You learn to accommodate it. You learn how to handle it. If you need meds, you get meds. You do stuff. But you don't let your stuff ruin your life and cheat you of life. You have to fight for life. You have to fight for the good things that are there, and don't let the other stuff poison it all out. And that's a God thing. That's a whole bunch of things. but you need to struggle against that. You can't wait till all your stuff is gone to enjoy life, because it's not going to be that way. Your stuff is going to be there. Maybe you get meds and it's better or something like that. But if you're an anxious person, you're going to probably be anxious in one form or another. You can't drink to get rid of the anxiety. You just got to learn to enjoy life and to take risks at living life despite that. There's one time, and I'll close with this. One time, I had sores in my feet. They're like, they grow there. You can put stuff on and they go away. But it hurt. It hurt to walk. And I said, we were going up north to our camp up north. I said, this is going to ruin the whole thing. And then for some reason, I had the wisdom to say, I'm gonna enjoy up north whether it hurts to walk or not. And the funny thing was, I enjoyed it better than I ever had, because I put effort into focusing on the good and ignoring the discomfort. And I had the best time up north because I put effort into enjoying stuff, and I blocked out the rest. So we can't get rid of all our stuff all the time, but we can focus on enjoying the liberties we have that are available to us. And that's a bit of a choice, but it is, it's work to enjoy life. But life is worth the enjoying. You can ask for help and say, Lord, help me enjoy what it is. It's AA is attitude of gratitude. You'll work at getting your head out of your own tailbone and into the good stuff, and that's my prayer for myself and everybody. Help us to enjoy the good stuff we have and not lose the day in our stuff. We'll have the stuff maybe, but we don't have to lose the good of the day. And that's sort of what I've got for this one. It's sort of simple. I think faith and recovery both. You can't dwell on the bad in the church and lose the good. You can't dwell on the bad in AA and lose the benefits of it. So that's an epiphany for me, because I have a tendency to be bitter and angry forever and ever, and this sort of gives me a way out. So this is Chuck at Lazarus Recovery Podcast, at the junction of faith and recovery. And don't drink, go to a meeting, and work hard at enjoying it despite your stuff. That's it. This is Chuck at Lazarus Recovery Podcast. Have a good night, good day, or good something. Bye-bye.